Hey, welcome to tonight's Lockdown Livestream. The flowers, of course, are from the New Leaf in Ghent. Thank you, Sarah and Laurel. You guys really, really rock. And again, I highly recommend the whole Give People Flowers thing anytime. So I'm going to add a little something to the storytelling in addition to the ones from my books, because earlier today I had posted a photograph of people have been showing pictures of their masks, their homemade masks, and I posted a picture of an Israeli issue military grade gas mask that I had been issued when I was covering the Gulf War from Tel Aviv. And a bunch of people had posted and asked me, tell us something about what your best memory or most vivid memory of that was. And I thought I'd pick a funny to start us off with before we get to the regular readings. So I was a very eager young reporter for a publication called The Sandpaper on Long Beach Island, and I had wangled a deal to get over there. And so I wanted to be like the first one, always ready. I was like Hermione Granger girl reporter. It was bad. I was really, the good girl. So I get up real early, and when it was time to go to the press conferences that Bibi Netanyahu was giving or someone was giving, I was always like front row, center, ready, early, skip breakfast, got there. And then there was Christian Amanpour's very French cameraman. Oh, he was so French. And he liked to stay up late drinking, and he'd wake up late in the morning, and he'd have his galwa, and he'd have his coffee, and then he would get there late behind everyone. And he picked the shorty. I'm just scraping 5'3", and he would come barreling through with his camera on his shoulder, and he would elbow me out of the way, just like knock me out of the way. Sometimes he'd even knock me down, and I'd say, hey, and he'd say, I need to be where you are, okay? I am CNN. I need to be where you are. And he did that. And my mama didn't raise an idiot or a doormat. I'm a native New Yorker. Thank you very much. And so I also didn't want to get into a fight with him because I was a newbie reporter. So I kind of assessed the situation, and I thought, what would happen if I just bumped him from behind? Because, we're all jostling around. I just innocently bumped him from behind, and his sound cable were to fall out. And then, when the press conference was over, I could just, like, oh, look, and bump into him and put the sound cable back in. So he'd never really know what would happen until he got back to edit the footage, and there was no sound. And every time he needed to be where I was, his sound was not where it needed to be. And eventually nature took its course, and he figured that I had staked out a bad spot, and he stopped taking my spot, and he started taking somebody else's spot instead. So that's the story of Christian Amanpour's cameraman. So Christian, I'm really sorry, because I know that didn't help you very much. I didn't know you at the time. I really like your work. But anyway, so today I thought that I would pick a story that really speaks to the heart of the matter. This is from my second book. I know, it's reversed because I'm using the back camera, but it's called Tell Me Another Story. And it's called, quite appropriately, The Sky is Falling. And I thought, yeah, so the sky is falling. I'm going to tell you why that's okay. All right? So, Helena looked up at the sky and wondered how it had become so blue. It matched her mood perfectly. To Helena, being in a blue mood meant wallowing in misery and sadness. Helena had been suffering days of worry and trial for many months, and today, when she looked up at the sky, she suddenly felt the urge to find the answer. She looked up and she demanded to know, why me? Why does this keep happening to me? No answer. Helena decided that maybe what she needed, more than a reason, was assistance. She had struggled alone for so long. She had never asked anyone for help. People were always offering to help, but always doing things that she thought only made matters worse. She'd been stubbornly certain that only her way of doing things could make things right. She had been wrong. Also, she had been sure she could manage all alone. Now she was rethinking that too. On an impulse, Helena cried out to the heavens, "Help me, please. Just help me." As she shouted the last word, she saw a crack appear in the blue above her, and the crack began to twist and turn and spread until it formed an odd shape, and then the shape shook and wriggled until it freed itself from the rest of the heavens, and then that piece of the sky fell. It did not plummet. It simply drifted down end over end over end until it landed on Helena's lap and let out a small sigh. Helena let out a yelp of shock and looked up to see a black hole where the little blue piece had once been. Helena gazed at the little blue piece. It was soft, thin, and slippery, like a piece of fine silk. Oh no, she said aloud. She was sure that her life had just gone from bad to worse. Then she looked up and shouted, "What is happening? I asked you to help me?" In her hand, the little swatch sighed again. Then it seemed to melt through her fingers and attach itself to her skirt like a patch. In a panic, Helena tried to tug at the little patch and pull it free, but she failed. This was the last straw for Helena. She had suffered failure and loss and defeat for months. Every single thing she had touched had come to ruin, and she was in despair. And now, when she asked for help from above, the result was to have the very sky fall down on her. Helena looked up and shouted, "I know you're there. You who made me and the sky and all things. I asked you to help me, and you made the sky fall on me? Why? Why are you doing this to me?" In answer, there came another crack in the heavens above, and another piece of the sky cut itself away and began to float down. This time, Helena jumped up, gathered her skirts, and ran as fast as she could to keep the patch from landing on her. But try as she might, the wind carried the piece of sky, and it soon found a resting place on her shoulder where it attached itself. Helena stamped her foot in frustration. "Oh, get off," she said, and she tugged and tugged at the new patch. Looking up at the sky, she saw the growing blackness. There were no stars in the black part of the sky. It looked like a piece of black velvet stitched onto the blue satin of the heavens. With each cry and request she made, a new patch fell, and Helena fought against it, tearing at herself. She did this over and over until she was too exhausted to fight. She sat down and she stared at the patches on her clothing. Then she laid her hand on one of the broad pieces of blue. It didn't feel like fabric. It felt softer, and it sent a shivery feeling through her hand and her fingers as they slid across the patch. Her mind began to wander, and she thought of all the times that she'd found joy beneath the blue sky. She remembered smiles and sun. Helena began to stroke at the patch. It felt lovely and soft. Before she knew what was happening, she had a little smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. But because this was not the kind of help that Helena had expected to get, she forced herself to stop smiling. She stopped stroking the patch of sky she wore and began to shout up again. "This is not helping my problems. I need help." To her horror, a huge crack began to form, and two large sections of the blue released themselves and began to come down at her at a much faster rate. Instead of floating, these seemed to form into large wings, and they came down in a swift glide. Again, Helena got up and ran as fast as she could, and again caught up with her. This time, it wrapped her like a blanket, Helena had the strangest feeling of being given an enormous blue, shiny, soft hug. She closed her eyes and felt herself being propelled backwards. She toppled over and landed on her back in the grass. Helena fought hard. She was afraid she would suffocate, but the feeling of love and peace that now surrounded her stopped her struggles. It took a few moments before Helena opened her eyes. She was covered from head to foot in a flowing robe of the finest heavenly blue. Though it was thin, and there was now quite a strong wind coming from that big black hole in the sky, Helena felt warm and comfortable. She felt loved, happy, and safe. Helena smiled and looked up at the sky. Softly, she called up, I don't understand what just happened. Then there came a voice like no other she'd ever heard. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It sang through the trees, it rumbled through the earth, it sighed through the long grass. You prayed for help, help has come, said the voice. You've been given back what you lost. Piece by piece, I have patched you up. The voice continued. You cloaked yourself in anger, fear, and sadness. Now you've been given something far better to wear. You've been given love and peace. I expect you to wear them well. Helena wrinkled her brow and shook her head. I asked for help, and the sky fell, she said. I was overwhelmed. I was knocked down. The voice came to her from all around and said, sometimes having the sky fall on you is the greatest of gifts. You've learned that you can survive and find peace even after all seemed lost. You learned that even though the very heavens may come to rest upon your shoulders, the burden could become light as air. Helena smiled. As she gazed at the sky, the hole began to mend itself, getting smaller and smaller, until all of the blue was clear again. She stretched out her arms. She waved at the sky. And found that her clothes were just as they'd always been. The blue robes had vanished. Don't leave me, she cried out in fear. The voice that was everywhere and nowhere came to her again. I surround you as the veil that is the sky covers the earth. Like the blue of the sky, I may not always be seen. The clouds of worry or sadness may hide me. At times, you may run from me or be in darkness as black as night, but I am and always will be with you. For the first time in her life, Helena felt true peace and calm. She knew these words were the truest she had ever heard. She lay back in the grass under the blue sky and fell asleep. She slept for a day and a night. When she awoke, she found that her family and friends had become worried over her and had come to find her. Helena hugged each one and smiled as she had not smiled in many long months. What has happened to change you so? Asked a friend. Helena grinned and looked up. I just learned how much I am loved and how good it feels to know that I'm not alone. From that day to this, Helena lived a happier life. She spent her days and nights knowing that no matter what happened, there was always a little piece of heaven sitting on her shoulder. And for the final reading of the night, I'm going to read you one called The Door. Oh, this little illustration in here. In the middle of a great and shining city stood a door. It was tall and strong, made of rich mahogany. It seemed to glow with strength and power. Though it was not locked, it bore a brass plaque that read, "Some simply knock to enter, others beat me down. Not all who cross the threshold like what is found." Day and night, people made the pilgrimage, coming and going through the doorway. As the saying foretold, some gained entry easily, but came away dissatisfied. I don't know what is so wonderful about that place, they often grumbled as they exited. Others battered away for no earthly reason and left broken themselves. More beat the door down only to find that once they were inside, they too were filled with their own triumph to benefit. They were too filled with their own triumph to benefit by what entry had to offer. Still, enough exited in joy and gladness, filled with the look of one given a great gift, that the spot was never idle. On one cold and blustery day, a small child came to the door. Instead of knocking or attacking or even trying to handle, he simply sat down on the stoop and leaned against the door. His name was Trace. Trace was an orphan. He had lived many places with many families until the day he wandered up to the door. Eyeing the great portal, he sat. Trace could smell the oil of the wood. He could see the marks where it had been beaten. He saw his own face reflected in its shine, and with his face mirrored there, he saw the door's scars, and his own seemed to be one and the same. Trace placed his palm on the door. He felt that it was warm where he had expected coldness. A tingling radiated up his arm and through his small frame, and he could feel the voice of the door within him. "What has brought you here, little one?" the voice asked. Trace thought hard, but he could not find an answer. He came because he heard that the door made everything better. He came because he was lonely, and he felt drawn to the door. He didn't have an answer because, well, that was what he came there to find. So he honestly replied, "I don't know. I think I came just to be near you." The door swung open wide, and Trace got up and walked inside, and it closed behind him. Trace found he was in an empty room with ordinary white walls and not a stick of furniture or carpet. He sat on the floor and began to cry. "Disappointed?" asked the voice. The child stopped crying. His relief rushed like warm water into an empty tub. "Oh, I thought I was alone." The child sniffed. I cried because I thought you were gone. I thought I was alone." "Now that you've recognized me as your companion, you will never be alone again," said the voice of the door. Now the room's appearance shifted, and all around were doors seemingly identical to the great one that he'd entered through. "Choose," said the voice. "Find the one among the many that is the true door, and your life will never again be empty. You can do it. Once you've felt my presence, you will never fail to find me." Trace stood, and he looked at the doors. He walked around the room. While all of them looked like the door, each contained a slight deviation, a hint that he was seeing was an imitation, a false door. And suddenly he realized that their flaw was a lack of warmth. They were all cold and dull. Then he knew the other doors led nowhere. He made his choice, and he found himself standing back on the doorstep. Trace felt wonderfully whole for the first time in his life. "Thank you," he said to the door. "Will I see you again?" The door replied, "You will see me in every threshold you cross. I will never be closed to you, my child." And so it was. Thank you for watching. Thank you for hanging in there. Thank you for not letting all of the dark things get you. And when you think that they're going to get you, take a breath. Take a look at the sky. Listen to the wind. Look at the trees. Remember a story. And I'll be back for you tomorrow. Good night.